We want to look today at a very important part of the life of Imam Ali, an element which is there even though there is some tragedy attached to it, because one of the features of Imam Ali is that he was a warrior in the cause of Islam. And we want to explore that element of his life. Let's remind ourselves, first of all, that for the first 12 years after the beginning of the revelation to Prophet Muhammad, the Muslims lived in Mecca under persecution from the idol worshippers, the majority of the people in Mecca. It was after they moved from Mecca to Medina that the element of fighting entered into the discussion. And that's the element that we need to explore somewhat today. Ali played a hugely important part in defending the Muslim community in these battles, and indeed battles figured during the early part of the story as they will figure again in the last few years of the life of Ali. We know that the Prophet himself gave Ali a unique sword, Zulfiqar, the double-edged sword which was identified with Ali in his battles from that time onwards. And we have a recording that at the Battle of Badr, a voice is heard. One tradition tells us that it was the voice of the angel Gabriel. And it says, "There is no brave young man like Ali, and there is no sword like Zulfikar." So these two are inseparable during the remainder of the life of Ali the warrior. We need to think of the way in which he was used by the Prophet in battle. He was used very often in single-handed combat, and we need to view that from two perspectives. First of all, we need to say, why did they send out champions as single-handed fighters at the beginning of any battle? Well, the honest answer is that if they could win over the battle at that time, then there would be no need for the mass of the army on both sides to engage, and that would save a huge number of human lives. So a great weight was resting upon the champions when they went out in single-handed combat. If they could overcome the enemy, then there was a good chance that the lives of many of their men, many of their soldiers would be saved. So this is the first element that we see, as it were, weighing upon the shoulders of Ali as he goes into single-handed combat. The second element, of course, is him himself within himself, because single-handed combat is a sign of total dedication, of total trust, of total reliance upon God. God will give me the victory. My life is not my life, but it is the life of one who is a servant of God, one who has dedicated everything to God. It is therefore an act of trust, an act of complete dedication into the service of God. And so Ali goes forward in single-handed combat with these two elements. Firstly, his knowledge that he has the possibility of saving the lives of many of his men, and secondly, that his life is totally in the hands of God, and he trusts upon God to give him the victory in combat. There were several occasions during these years when the Prophet was in Medina, when there were major battles and when there were skirmishes. And often Ali was involved in both of these types of fighting. We see him leading companies of men in small skirmishes when there were raiding parties who attacked the Muslims and such like. So we see him as a commander of men and not just as one involved in his own single-handed combat. But we see him also in the major pitched battles. And his station in these battles was always alongside the Prophet, so that the two of them were inseparable in this fighting. We see that one of the functions that Ali had was to be the standard bearer. Now, the standard bearer is the one who bore the flag, the sign of the Prophet's army, the Prophet's company in battle. It was the standard bearer's job to, as it were, inspire and invigorate the other men in the army that they should persevere and they should continue in the fight. He was to put new fight and new spirit into the whole army so that they would carry on in this way. So we see Ali as an inspiration to the other men who were fighting in the company of the Prophet. Ali in this way then is a role model to all those who would engage in fighting for the perseverance of the message of Islam. It was that message which had to be protected, which had to be sustained. And of course, the message bearer was the Prophet himself. And so we see Ali in those battles calling the men, rallying them to the Prophet's side so that he would be protected, so that the message would not be lost, so that the message would be fulfilled. And we see Ali as the role model of total dedication to the Prophet, total commitment in faith and trust to the way of Islam and to the way of submission to God, and his life is laid out in front of God as a token of his complete submission to the divine will. Fighting other people, being involved in combat, can never be something that any human being takes lightly. Because to go into combat is to be prepared to take the most ultimate, the most serious decision that any human can take, and that is to take the life of another human being. And so we see Ali as not only the fearless warrior, but also we need to explore the way in which he conducted himself in combat as a role model, not just of fearlessness, but also of valor, of chivalry, and of nobility in his combat with others. Never do we see him treating the life of another lightly, as though it were just a small thing to take another human life. But always we see him with the greatest determination, with the greatest dedication, that he will fulfill his duty, he will be obedient to God in this manner, but he will not disgrace or demean himself by stooping to the level of the enemy, of the opponents of Islam, in the way that he conducts his battles and his fighting. Always he will be there with Zulfiqar in his hand as the role model and standard bearer of the uprightness of the warrior in the name of Islam into the future.